What is it like living in Sheerness? Hi there, wherever you're seeing this video from. We love to tell you about living in Sheerness. On this journey, we're going to pilot this flight together. But before we go, it's good to lay this fact bare. We love all towns in the UK, with no bias for or against any, including Sheerness. We know the story we're about to share wouldn't go down well with some fans and residents of Sheerness. It'll expose the real side of the town. So what is it like living in Sheerness? You can be sure that we'll look objectively at it both ways. But first, we'd like to give you some background information about the town posing as our centre of concentration. About Sheerness. For a start, you need to realise that living in Sheerness means living in a port town. It's a civil parish just beside the mouth of the Medway River, located on the northwest corner of the Isle of Sheppey, situated in North Kent. After the neighbouring town of Minster, Sheerness is the second largest town with more than 13,000 residents. Ordinarily, you could expect the kind of life in Sheerness to mirror the peculiarities of life in a seaside resort. Kindly bear that in mind as we analyse both the challenges and strengths of this town. But where's Sheerness coming from? In other words, how was it in the past? Understanding this will help us appreciate what it is like living in Sheerness. The first structure in this location was a fort built by order of King Henry VIII of England to prevent enemy ships from gaining access to the Medway River and attacking the naval dockyard at Chatham in the 16th century. The plans were first laid in 1665 by the Navy Board for Sheerness Dockyard. The work began in 1666 on a facility at which warships might be provisioned and repaired. It was later replaced with a stronger fort. Unfortunately, this second fort was destroyed in 1667 when the Dutch naval fleet invaded it as part of what would be known historically as the Raid on the Medway. Following that raid on the Medway, the older fortification was strengthened. 2 years later, in 1669, a Royal Navy dockyard was established in Sheerness. The closure of the economic lifeblood. Throughout the period when warships were being stocked and repaired at the dockyard, Sheerness enjoyed a measure of prosperity. Living in Sheerness during that time was great. Unfortunately, things changed in the 1960s. Savage spending cuts by Harold Macmillan's government saw the dockyards closed. Subsequently, much of the UK began turning away from manufacturing. This was even accelerated under Margaret Thatcher in the late 20th century. Sheerness became seriously hit by the effect of the close. Because the dockyard was the economic lifeblood of the town, its economy was paralysed and the source of livelihood of many residents was cut off. In fact, it resulted in the brutal loss of 2,500 jobs. Despite all attempts at its restoration, the town has not fully recovered. To dip the town further into poverty, the historic church was closed in the 1970s. The church and the activities going on in it had hitherto added some spice to the social, spiritual and economic life of the town. Following the halt in the usage, the building became decrepit. As if that wasn't bad enough, the church was burnt out after an accidental fire 2 decades later. The closure of the church definitely affected life in Sheerness. Children living in Sheerness. What was just mentioned could explain the ranking of Sheerness as one of the poorest towns in the UK. There are several indications of poverty in the town. One of them is child poverty. Of course, the real picture is this: not every child in Sheerness has a bite of poverty. As a matter of fact, some families are financially comfortable. We make bold to say, then, that children living in Sheerness are not condemned to a life of poverty and starvation. Nevertheless, the percentage of children living in poverty in Sheerness is alarming, and the future isn't at all encouraging. We found that in the national figures issued by End Child Poverty, as compiled by Loughborough University, the statistics released show a constant increase in Sheerness East's child poverty rate over the years, whereas the borough has shown variation. For those living in this town with kids in the families, it means that their kids could be among the estimated 800 children, almost half, that live in poverty. Poverty's grip on the children living in Sheerness East, the area has a higher percentage of child poverty than anywhere else in Swale. According to the figures for July to September 2017, released in January 2018, for example, 44% of children in Sheerness East were found to be living in poverty, while for the entire Swale the average was 27%. While the statistics appear to be improving borough-wide, they're getting worse in Sheerness East. To illustrate that, the Swale average of child poverty was 28% from October to December 2015, whereas it was 41% in Sheerness East. From this figure, you'd realise that Sheerness East didn't share in the borough's 1% drop. Rather, it experienced a 3% increase. Going back another 2 years, we saw the same trend. When the borough-wide averaged 26%, the average in Sheerness East was 37%. Youths living in Sheerness. This is an interesting aspect to consider. Kids complain that there's no job to do, but other people believe that the internet has changed the youth's attitude towards work. They do not want to get their hands dirty. The usual grievance in the town is that the internet has killed the high street. But sadly for the kids, there's practically nothing to do to earn a legitimate income. They also complain about a lack of connections with influential figures. The meagre jobs available for commoners don't pay beyond minimum wage. Youths living in Sheerness generally believe that they have to move off the island to have a much better life and jobs. This could also have led them into drugs and crimes that seem unsettling in the town. It has a reputation for drug problems, which some feel is blown out of proportion. This drug-related problem is peculiar to coastal towns up and down the country. It's about those profiting from the horrible deal by taking the drugs into Sheerness. But then, young people taking the drugs also could be lured into it because of the town's failure. Living in deprivation. While not everyone in Sheerness is living in deprivation, the town remains one of Kent's most deprived areas. By the same token, it earns the same honour for the entire country. The coastal 0.4-kilometre stretch, Sheerness East, which includes shops, housing, a leisure centre and a beach, is found in England's top 1.5% most deprived areas. Swale, the borough in which Sheerness is located, is the second most deprived in Kent, behind Thanet. However, no other area in the borough is rising in the deprivation scale faster than Swale and its Sheerness. That is per the latest available figure of indices of multiple deprivation, IMD, that assigns the overall deprivation figure based on factors like employment levels, income levels, skills and training, housing and services, health, crime and the living environment. Houses in bad shape. Another unacceptable feature of this town is housing. It's not just the empty shops in the town that are run down. Many of the houses in Sheerness also show signs of decay and neglect. The challenges of rented accommodations are just too much to be limited to a single solution. One has to do with tenants' attitudes. They go in there and treat the property carelessly. Due to poverty and deprivation or lack of will, they don't just pay the bills. Landlords aren't doing pretty well in making living in Sheerness humane. Building maintenance is poor. They complain that they can't afford the repairs. Lack of government presence. It appears that the residents of Sheerness are left on their own. Government presence isn't felt as such in the town. To some people in living in Sheerness are far away from London in a remote corner of Scotland. That's how the name sounds to some government officials before they read the maps. It's not at all surprising. Sheerness doesn't have a town council. It's being administered from a surrounding area. The Swale Borough Council is currently struggling with budget cuts such that it can hardly pay essential bills. Therefore, it'll be hard to make Sheerness a priority. But the good community spirit in the town is keeping the hope alive. Would you say living in Sheerness means living in poverty? There's a video on this channel that explains why Sheerness is so poor. Please let's have your comments on both. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.